And we're hoping that with this fleet, we can speed up the pace of digitization. And this is particularly exciting to me because some of these books haven't been open like 100 years. So there's just a lot of, I think, profound Catholic insight that's just not accessible to people right now. And as we get into these libraries and we digitize it, it becomes accessible. It's incredible. I mean, to think when we digitize a work here in the hub, and I should acknowledge that the Alexandria Digitization Hub has been on pilot with the Pontifical Oriental Institute for over a year now. So they were instrumental in getting the hub off the ground. What's incredible to me is that we'll be able to scan a few books a day, probably more than that. And the minute those books are finished scanning and they get processed, the contents of those books are made available to anyone in the world on any device in their native language immediately.
Good morning, Matthew.
Morning.
um, so today, what we want to do is we want to start to kind of unpack some of the history of Longbeard and find out where it kind of all began and the team as it is now, and then some of the bigger projects as we look into that horizon. So Matthew, here we're in Rome. I know that you were in Rome for a bit of time a few years ago, and have spent a lot of time in Rome. Can you share us a little bit the origin of Longbeard? How did the mission start?
Well, I mean, I remember pitching a bunch of the guys, many of whom would come to join us in my apartment in Toronto. I didn't really know much about business at all or entrepreneurship. At the time, I was working at the Archdiocese of Toronto, and I started my career there, working in the Office of Spiritual Affairs. We kind of dealt with a lot of doctrine questions and kind of canonical questions and things like that. And so they brought me in to help kind of fix up the office, help it run a little bit more efficiently. That was a great experience. And I mean, one thing it certainly did is made me aware of the innumerable, doctrinal issues that the priests have to kind of cover off. And of course, I'd been a seminarian for a time, so I had some sense of this, but I didn't fully appreciate the enormous demands on them for that. And so when I was working there, we used to get a lot of calls. Sometimes people asking doctrinal questions, sometimes people putting complaints. I need an exorcism kind of questions, stuff all over the place. And, we had to respond. And so we had to, and often that resulted in us going to primary sources, right? And then having to compose an email and respond. And this ate up a lot of our time, as you can imagine. So that's kind of, I think, of where the genesis of kind of the idea of Magisterium AI started, is there's got to be a more efficient way to do this. Later on, I moved on into the special projects office, and I ran that for a while. And one of the tasks I had was helping to get the world and the church to be more in active kind of dialogue with each other on important issues. So, I mean, one of the first projects was helping bring Steubenville conferences to Toronto, and so that was fun because that was, how do we engage young people, and of course, Steubenville conferences had been very successful at that point, and so they were trying to do a more effective job of engaging young people in the diocese. So bringing Steubenville conferences up to Toronto just seemed to make sense. That posed enormous challenges, and particularly like how do we leverage technology to effectively engage young people and encourage them to come and try this new thing for a lot of them, Steubenville conferences. Some of the other events we started something called the Chesterton Debate Series, which was trying to get, basic topics that are, let's say, like atheism, modern atheism, and trying to get a dialogue with the world on about it. And I remember one of the first ones we did was a priest of the Oratory in Toronto, the Oratory St. Philip Neri. And he was debating the head atheist for Canada or something like that, head of the Atheism Society, whatever it was called. And I remember just loving that debate. And I think exactly, like, that's what I wish I could see more of, right? Where we bring our best, they bring their best, and we just let the ideas go head to head, right? So we did a few other events along those lines. And so I kind of got excited at the prospect of leveraging technologies and using that, because we were using YouTube and things like that to distribute this content, using technology to help bring the faith into direct contact with the world. And at some point I realized that this really required more focused energy and effort. So that's when I decided it probably is the time to leave the Archdiocese and try and focus on this specifically. And this goes back to the whole pitching in the apartment. So, I knew some guys, but I didn't know a lot about, technology per se. I was just more of a user of it, and I'd come to appreciate its usefulness, but I didn't technically know how to build this stuff. So I pulled together a bunch of people. Most of them were in kind of the engineering world, some in the design space and things, and said, hey, what if we were to actually come together and kind of create some kind of agency in order to help build technology and ensure it's used more effectively for the purposes of primarily evangelization. And what kind of shocks me at that meeting is that everyone said, okay, let's do this. So, I mean, not everyone could leave their full-time jobs right away, but everyone kind of started investing their time and energy into it. And so that's essentially where Longbeard started. And we started initially just building websites and technology platforms for Catholic organizations. Growingly, started in Canada, then expanded to the U.S., and then eventually expanded to Rome. And so I had to do some more consulting work here. And so I was traveling between Toronto and Rome, fairly often. Initially, the client that actually brought us here initially was the Gregorian University Foundation, which later on would become a very close partner of ours. And then while I was here, I realized that there was a lot of organizations here that needed the kind of help that basically the problem we were trying to solve. It was very poignantly made aware to me that there was a lot of opportunities here. There were big challenges. And I realized I was traveling too much. And so eventually it kind of made sense for us to kind of move our headquarters here. And so we made that decision, I don't know, it's like 7 years ago now. And then very soon after, so when we started doing some work with the Pontifical universities and other Catholic organizations around the world. And then eventually I met, at the time, Father Michael Czerny, who was working at the Dicastery for Integral Human Development. And he proposed that the Pope, migrants and refugees was a big important issue for the Pope. And he let it know to me that the Pope wants to do more about this issue. And he wants to ensure that the effort that he's going to be supporting is leveraging all the cutting edge tools possible to ensure that they're as effective as possible, be as effective as they could be. And so Father Michael Czerny and then Father Michael Fabio Baggio, now both cardinals, said, why don't we work with you and why don't you come in and help us set up this technological infrastructure for the Pope's new migrants and refugees section. So that was our first big project, working with the Holy See directly. And it was a really exciting project. I mean, in large part because I just, when they asked me in the meeting, what would you do if you were setting technological infrastructure for an office in the Vatican? Well, how would you set it up? And I said, well, I mean, that's not a very complicated question. I mean, Fortune 500 have a pretty typical stack that's working well. So I proposed, the typical stack at the time. But I just kind of, back in my mind, I was thinking, but this is never going to happen. I mean, you'd have to get approval from Vatican IT department, and not to say that they wouldn't be excited about the prospect of making some, adding some new technologies to the stack. It's complicated, right? But they said, eventually I got the call and they said, let's do it. And I realized, well, when the Pope's running something, right, directly, that helps a lot. So we did. We went in there and I ended up partnering with Google on that project to help bring in this technological infrastructure to help facilitate, basically help them collaborate with parties all around the world to serve the issue of migrants and refugees.
And Matthew, what did it do to you to come, from Toronto, from Canada, where, there's a real high level of technological innovation. There's lots of, and to come to the Eternal City, where, at least the reputation is that things move at a slower pace. The Vatican has this great vision, but times technologically, it's oftentimes a little bit behind. What did you see the church's needs there? What did it illuminate more clearly for you?
That I think there's the people that are here are very eager to do more. I mean, obviously they're all here because they care about Christ, right, and evangelization, and they want to ensure that Christ is proclaimed to the four corners of the earth. I think that a lot of the problems that I'll say the Vatican, but merely the Holy See encounters and the other pontifical universities and stuff are very similar challenges that a lot of old, I'd say like governmental bureaucracies have, right? It's these technology changes very frequently, which requires a lot of retooling and re-education of the staff, and that can take that kind of change management can take a while. And so, and for some reasons, sometimes things just lose steam, right? And by the time you've trained a staff on one piece of tech, the next one's out, right? And because, well, what's the point? So, I mean, I should say, they weren't all the same. Some of them were at different levels. So there are some Vatican, dicasteries that are very sophisticated in the use of technology, and others which are just starting to understand it. So part of that, I think, is just a lot of that comes just kind of down to leadership, right? How important does the person who's in charge of that particular dicastery feel technology is in order to serve their mission? So I think the last 10 years, it's become increasingly clear they have to leverage it more effectively. It's just how. So that's the first thing is goodwill, good intentions. It's just it's difficult here as it would be with any big organization. I think the other part that's a bit kind of complicating is, I mean, the Vatican works in a lot of different languages, right? So, whenever you're building a tech platform, you have to start thinking about, okay, how's that platform going to work, in around the world, especially when you're servicing people of different language groups. And so that's difficult from, like, if you have, their various offices which are spread all over the world, right? So now you're handling change management not just for Rome, but you're handling change management globally, which is challenging. And then also the users of these technologies as well. So again, that's not a problem. That's non-typical for like a large Fortune 500 company. But I would say it is a little bit more. So if you think of it like a government bureaucracy, it's a little bit more rare, right? So I mean, you have the United Nations and organizations like that, which reach fairly far, but not many governments have that unique global of a challenge. So that makes it just harder, but it's not impossible.
Wow. So Matthew, so you're here in Rome. You're working with the with Father Chin at the time in the Decade for Integral Human Development, and specifically with the migrants and refugees section. You're building this technological infrastructure. When did when did you realize, with the innovations taking place in AI, with that space, making more and more, tides and ripples, that you felt like, oh, wow, this is something that I need to, then eventually pivot completely towards.
Well, I think like most people, Hollywood did a good job of priming me for why AI one day could be really important, right? I think all of us, like with many technologies, we're just kind of waiting for the technology to be further enough along that actually it can be practically useful or be practically capable of changing the world. And so I think when we started doing some work with Google and I saw how they were using AI under the hood, I got impressed with how they were leveraging it. But it's machine learning, classical machine learning thoughts. That takes, you got to be a pro to know how to do that stuff well, right? And you need lots of data, and I just didn't see any practical way for it to be leveraged. At the time. So really, it was a kind of a democratization issue, right? How do we democratize the technology and make it a little bit less difficult to use and implement? And it wasn't really till ChatGPT dropped. I mean, that was kind of the moment for me when I realized, wow, okay, hang on, this is different, right? This AI could be extremely useful. And so then it kind of like it harkened back. I mean, when I saw it being used, and I found out Catholics were using it, right, asking philosophical more questions, I realized, okay, the technology is great, but there's obviously some problems with it that need to be mitigated. I mean, the hallucination when it comes to like church doctrine is a big deal, right? I mean, you don't want the thing making up church doctrine and leading people astray. This is about people's souls. So the enormity of that kind of hit me. But then I thought back to when I was back in in the chancery at the archdiocese, right? And I thought to myself, man, if I was working at the archdiocese and I could just ask this chatbot anything, and it would go to the sources and give me the answers. And I thought, wow, I mean that could be transformative. And then when I started thinking about, well, what if that could be available to anyone in the world, right? This isn't just a tool for priests and for chanceries. This is something that, in principle, anyone could use. I realized it was worth making a run at it to see if we could make it work for the Catholic Church. And so we started what was a research project at the time called Magisterium AI to see how far we could go in kind of mitigating the downsides. So how could we effectively reduce hallucinations? How do we ensure that the answers that it's producing are aligned, right, and are relevant? How do we ensure that there's greater transparency when the AI is generating? I mean, right now, when you ask ChatGPT a question, it'll generate an answer typically from its, based on its training data, which it consists of, I'm sure, some church documents, but also Reddit posts and things like that. And so when you get a Catholic answer, it may sound good, right? But how do you know? How do you know it's faithful? And so that's why for us, when we built Magisterium, we knew that everything that our AI said has to be grounded in sources. In the same way, Perplexity was approaching this in a very similar manner. So how do we ensure that everything the AI says is grounded in primary sources? And that way, it helps the AI to ensure that everything it's saying is aligned because it has a source to reference. And also for the people, they can have confidence knowing that what the AI is saying is true. And if they don't, if they think something sounds wrong, they can check the source and see why it's said. And anyway, so that began the project, and we found that if you, with the right combination of prompt engineering, citations, and tools, that you could, for the most part, mitigate hallucinations. Hallucinations are always a reality, but you could significantly reduce them. And that's when we realized, when we scaled this out and let it kind of out into the world, and we got great feedback, that this is something worth investing in.
Wow. And Matthew, can you share a little bit about the team that, the behind the scenes that's working on this? When you first launched Magisterium AI to the public, how many documents was it
It,
sourcing?
well, when we initially released it for kind of private testing, this is where we were trying to work with the archdiocese and canonists and things to test the project, just to make sure. I think we only had 600. I mean, we had the big ones like the catechisms, the compendiums, the code of canon law. It's up so the prime some encyclicals, things like that. The stuff that most people would have on their shelves, and we thought that's a good place to start.
And what
But
was the response like at first?
it was good. I mean, the short story when it came to when we kind of like we're supposed to be like privately, quietly launching it for the purpose of expanding the testing group. The story is at the time we released it, I ended up agreeing to an interview with EWTN. I think it was like News Nightly or something, and I said yes to the interview, but hindsight it probably was not a good idea, and I should have waited because after the interview it went viral. And then we got so much traffic, it actually crashed us. And we couldn't get back up again because we were exceeding all the rate limits of the LLM we were using. And so we actually, at the time, ChatGPT was the one we were using under the hood. So we actually had to go directly to Sam Altman and appeal for help. And he responded, and he stepped up pretty quickly to help us out. And that was in large part thanks to Father Philip Larray, who's been a collaborator on us on Magisterium AI since the very beginning. So I mean, it's ironic, right, that if it wasn't for Sam Altman, I don't know if Magisterium AI would have been here today because I don't think we would have been able to get back up. At the time, they were very compute constrained. There's only so much inference compute to them, and ChatGPT exploded, and they weren't expecting it, and so they had to kind of rate limit a lot of people are using their API, and so for us, we weren't an enterprise client, so we weren't going to get priority. So if he hadn't stepped in to do that, I don't think we would have been able to get back online for I don't know how long. And what I was really concerned about is we knew we still had a lot more work to do. Magisterium AI wasn't perfect, but we still felt it was better than some of the other products that have been put out there, which basically we call our wrappers. You put like a kind of a user interface on top of ChatGPT and you call it Catholic, but because it wasn't referencing the primary documents and things, they weren't really dealing with the hard problems of hallucinations and things. And so when those apps came out and people tried them and they hallucinated, well, it didn't look good, right? And it was kind of damaging for the Catholic AI ecosystem. So I was, because we were trying to move more slowly and try and do this right, I was really important to me that we continued the work, and so him stepping in had a huge impact.
And Matthew, can you break it down? How does Magisterium AI differentiate in theory and also in practice with regards to the other major LLMs and then also the other Catholic alternatives?
Yeah, it's a good question. So in large part, it just comes down, well, one to the objectives of the systems themselves, right? So ChatGPT and Gemini and Claude and Perplexity, their objective function, as we say in the industry, so their purpose is not fidelity, right? I mean, they're not optimizing on those benchmarks, and so they can often do a good job of representing church teaching. I think they're getting very good at it nowadays, but they're not perfect. And because they don't benchmark for it, it is one of these areas, especially in like long form conversations, where we start asking questions about a more obscure church teaching and things like that. Is they won't have a lot of data on it necessarily, and they will have a propensity to hallucinate. So that's an issue. And then there's a question of when they do go for sources, what sources are they using? I mean, are they using the right sources, or are they just doing a web search and grabbing stuff from websites and things, which sometimes may work and sometimes it doesn't, right? So that's another issue. And the other is just, I would say, I talked about how their objectives are not fidelity. I mean, and one of the major problems I think with a lot of these LLMs is they're more and more optimizing for user engagement, which one would expect because that's how they generate revenue. And so that can often lead to this we call sycophancy, right? Where they're trying to kind of keep you engaged, and therefore they have this disposition to tell you what you want to hear, which makes sense in a lot of use cases, but not when you're querying Catholic Church teaching. So those are two reasons, and the other primary one where we saw particular issues was when they were asked questions about like complex documents or spiritual resources that where you can't just like memorize all the content and just regurgitate it and make sense of it. Like a good example would be the divine office. if someone were to ask me, hey, I want to pray the divine office today, ChatGPT, so give me the divine office. It may have the divine office it may have trained on it, right? So it may be in its neural net, maybe in its parameters there, but retrieving it and organizing it and putting it out in a way that makes sense and is accurate, it's not effective at that. So we realized that a large part of our work, in addition to expanding our knowledge base relentlessly, was about building these proprietary tools, or I should say specialized tools, not proprietary, specialized tools that would allow the right context to be served to the models, right? So if someone did ask for, in principle, or something we're working on right now, a better example would be of the readings of the day, which is something that's currently in Magisterium AI. It knows the location of the person, it therefore knows the date, and therefore it can select the right readings and make sure that those readings are provided to the model. And that way the model has the right context. And so, as users have been interacting, we become painfully aware of all kinds of different ways LLMs are just kind of limited. And whenever we come across one of those limitations, we see if we can develop some kind of tool to help the LLM come to the right answer.
No, that's extraordinary. And Matthew, in terms of education, like I can imagine the Magisterium AI would be the perfect tool to accompany students, teachers through a course, through a classroom, through knowledge base. How do you see Magisterium AI, you know, impacting and integrating itself into the Catholic education model?
Well, I think we're already starting to see how AI is being integrated into the education space. I mean, I think, every teacher is probably painfully aware of how much their students are becoming to rely on AI. And so I don't think that necessarily is a bad thing. Obviously we don't want people kind of outsourcing all their critical thinking skills to large language models. But I don't think that's that's how it's gonna play out. I think in the end, I think people were curious by nature, and so as long as we were presented with the right questions to ask, I think people are going to ask them. And I think outsourcing to an LM to kind of give them to bring the right context to bear and can be helpful on a journey. And so I don't think fundamentally I don't think people's questions are ever going to stop, provided they know the right questions to ask. And so I think what it'll just do is just allow people to kind of work through a lot more than they used to be able to do, right? When we think about like 100 years ago, if I had a profound philosophical question, I would have to hope my priest could cover it off. And if he couldn't, I'd have to go find a philosopher, right? Which means I'd probably have to go to a university and just, or have to go to a library, right? And dig through books. I mean, so that's a lot of what we say in the industry, friction, right? It's hard work to get that answer. And to think now, all I have to do is go to Magisterium AI and ask the question, and then it queries more and more, almost everything the church is like said on the topic, retrieves those documents, and then the AI reads them all and then presents me an answer with the citations. That's incredible. So I just don't see long-term how that is going to truly hurt humanity. Again, provided we know why we're meant to exist and what life's about, and therefore we know the right questions to be asking. I think in the end, it'll just encourage people to ask more questions, and I think that actually will further academics. If you were to say to me, like, as far as vision goes, how do I think AI will play an important role in Catholic education? I think one of the things that we're kind of calculating around is how much value would there be for a student if they had like a private tutor, right? That could work with them in a very personalized way to help them learn. And I think that this is something that the broader AI community is working on as well. And we're thinking about it more kind of like in a Catholic catechetical context. And we see a lot of value there. I mean, if you think about catechetics classes typically, right? I mean, you could have 20, 30, 40, 50 students in there. And so, the teacher or the priest or whoever is delivering the religious sister, they have a curriculum they have to cover, and they try and cover it. They deliver it the best way they can. But, a lot of those kids, I'm sure would really benefit if they had more kind of personalized instruction, which takes into account pedagogically how they learn most optimally, right? And I think that's one of the benefits of artificial intelligence, right? Is that, and this is something we're working for as we build our voice mode. And the idea is that a student can actually interact with Magisterium AI via voice, and then the Magisterium AI will be given a curriculum, will be basically told to instruct that student on the curriculum, and then validate their understanding as they work their way through. And what's neat about that is that as the AI is interacting with the student, it learns about them. It can adapt its pedagogical style and approach to help the student succeed. So in that way, you get kind of highly personalized learning, and I think that's very exciting, especially when you think about places in the world where it's difficult for them to get access to to quality teachers, or priests or catechists. And so I think this is a way to kind of democratize this kind of catechesis and ensure it's optimized for every student, which to me is exciting.
That's fantastic. And then Matthew, you mentioned expanding the Catholic knowledge base, and that was like one of the projects for Magisterium AI. Can you share how you're doing that? What does that look like to expand that knowledge base?
Well, I mean, initially it was working with some of our collaborators. Some of them are priests and professors to kind of figure out what is the primary doctrine that we should be ensuring Magisterium AI is referencing. So that at first it was very easy, right? I mean, it was just let's just get all the core dogma and the fundamental doctrine in there, and then the question is where do we go from there? And so we had kind of two approaches. One was consulting with academics, and they were sharing with us what they think is most important. The other was just listening to the users and kind of monitoring what they're asking about, and then evaluating how effective the AI is answering the questions, and then determining if we didn't think that the answer was sufficient, why, and was it due to some lack of understanding of the question, or was it just didn't have enough resources, and so it was irritatingly brief, and so that's how expanding the knowledge base kind of developed. Is one was if we had a question, the answer wasn't good, needed sources, cool, let's write down, let's go do some research and find out if there are some sources that can cover those off. Let's prioritize digitizing those and adding them to the knowledge base, and that helped a lot. And then the other was just talking to professors of different, different kinds, moral and systematic, and finding out, what are the key works that would most inform, would be most useful to users day to day. And then, of course, we started considering what would be of use to researchers later. So, anyways, so that and we realized that every time we prioritized and we ingested a new trove of data, the AI just generally got better. And I think it makes sense. I mean, obviously, when someone asks a question, the more documents it has to reference, the better the answer, right? I mean, catechism may give a very concise answer, but if it has 5 or 6 different answers, and some of those are historical answers from previous it can kind of see a kind of a broader way of explaining it, and I think in some ways that can be useful, because what we often find is some people may not be content with the answer, right? So they ask a follow up question. They're asking the same thing, but they need to express a different way. And so when it has access to kind of different kinds of explanations, we found that really helped a lot. So I mean, our knowledge base, when we started with 600, we knew it was not sufficient. And so we said that one of our main focus of our company has to be basically digitizing the patrimony of the church. And then that became a secondary mission of ours. The first mission being build and scale Catholic AI. Second, digitizing the patrimony of the church. And so it wasn't really until we got, I would say, past maybe the 8,000 mark that we really started noticing a big difference. When we had 8,000 documents, and the one document would be like the Eridicon, so some of these docs were enormous. That we noticed that the AI was pretty good at finding a number of references to cover off most queries, and now I think we're over approaching 28,000 works, and hopefully by the end of the summer we'll be able to double that. So what we're looking at now is having the collective works of all the fathers of the church, the doctors of the church, and basically everything the popes have said, at least pretty comprehensively for the last 120 years. And now we're starting to go back into the more ancient popes to include those writings as well.
Wow. And Matthew, working on these very hard problems, what does it make you even more aware in terms of Catholic knowledge? I mean, this continuity, this universality at the same time. Um, One of the big challenges that I know that a lot of the other major LLMs are facing is, well, what is objective truth? What are you referencing? That and having this incredibly high quality of knowledge of texts that have been worked on for centuries and centuries. What is it? What does it bring to bear? What does it make even more clear in your eyes now?
Well, I think the first thing is the questions that we may think that people will have, and we had a lot of expectations what questions people will have, are not necessarily questions they ask. I mean, and that was pretty shocking to us. There's a word for that. We call it the long tail. And so when we launched Magisterium AI, we felt fundamental doctrine should be able to cover. I think it's because we just figured, at least when we got it started, it'd probably be catechists and teachers and things like that that'd be using Magisterium AI predominantly. But then very quickly it started getting into the high schools, and it was incredible how many people would ask these very personal questions, like, here's something going on in my life. What would the church say to me? And this caused a bit of a panic for us, because that required the LLM to kind of generalize from, say, first principles to that particular situation. And, the early models weren't that intelligent. Not, I'm saying intelligence, in quotation marks. They weren't very good at that. They were okay, but they weren't great. But they're certainly a lot better now. And so one of the like key challenges is how do we help the LLM generalize, or should we even be doing this? I mean, my initial instinct was we should not be doing this. This is too dangerous. But then I realized that the questions are going to keep coming. They're just not going to come to us. They're going to take it to ChatGPT. And so how comfortable are we with that? Right? I mean, at least we're our objective function is fidelity. We're going to try to make sure that the AI is faithful, whereas ChatGPT is not going to try, right? It'll do its best, of course, but it's going to be wrong a lot more than probably we would because we're making concerted effort. So, as much as uncomfortable as as I was with the prospect, we knew that this is something we were just going to have to do. We have to find a way to accommodate this. And so then we started trying to think through where's the greatest trove of knowledge or examples of generalization of church teaching to people's particular situations or societal situations, contextual situations. And eventually we realized, well, hang on, the popes, that's what the popes do all the time. I mean, like they have homilies, they have general audiences, not just popes, cardinals and things as well. So what we did is we just kind of prioritized getting all the homilies of the popes and all the general audiences, and we just started digitizing it, and that helped a lot. I mean, because now we had thousands and thousands of examples, and so that showed the AI, because these like a general audience, the catechesis of, let's say, Benedict XVI were incredible, right? I mean, he's taking very complex documents and things like that, and he's distilling them for people in ways they can understand. So when the AI had access to those distillations and could see those patterns, it just became more effective at general. So that's one thing, is at the long tail was certainly a surprise. I think the other kind of surprising thing to me in this project was just the extent to which people are comfortable using technology to facilitate their spiritual life. I was, I'm a convert to Catholicism, but I had I was fortunate to be able to go to seminary. And so I benefited from a lot of, personal, a time with a lot of great formators and things like that. And so a lot of these spiritual practices became kind of second nature to me, because I had to do them by force of habit. And of course, when you're in seminary, your life is kind of built around your spiritual life. And so that becomes something of a rhythm. But when I left seminary, I became aware, secular makes it really hard, right, to structure your life that way. And I think one of the things I've kind of noticed, I think one of the reasons why people like using technology to help facilitate spiritual life is because, carrying the breviary with them, on trips or between meetings is just something that's not practical, right? And then maybe on a cab somewhere, right? And they just want to do it now, because now they have the time. And so that's a kind of a silly example, but we realize that as long as people are busy, right, trying to work and look after their family, and we're going to have to find ways to help them facilitate their spiritual lives. And frankly, technologies can be very efficient at doing that. So, if listening to our users and kind of what features they want beyond kind of a chatbot experience, to do they want the readings of the day, loading in common prayers, things like the Angelus and other things people do on a regular basis. What prayers and things can we add? There's other apps that are doing this as well. But what I'm looking forward to in the future, we'll be launching in the fall, is personalization. And I think there's an enormous opportunity here where we can start to, as we begin to understand a user, as they ask questions, interact with the app, there's an opportunity for us then to go a little bit deeper and ask them more questions. And then we start to populate a vector space around each user, right? Which is kind of like a contextual space around each user. And then understanding in principle that all Catholics, we're all called to be saints. So we have some semblance of what you need to do in order to be a saint, which is, which we get from church teaching. How can we help kind of personalize? How can we draw down from the knowledge base, right? And ensure that the right spiritual insights and the right prayers are available, to the users to help them level up their spiritual lives. And this is something we're really, really interested in doing. So basically, it's helping the AI to be more personally useful to people in their spiritual journeys.
That's extraordinary. And Matthew, looking at the long tail and having access in some regards to the the most immediate kind of pulse of the faithful, the questions they're asking, the concerns they might have, the issues they're wrestling with. What has that taught you about our mod times, and the faithful?
A fair bit, I have to say. I mean, I've been, users are anonymized in our system on the back end, so we don't know who's asking what. But we do have to monitor what people are asking, what the answers to the AIs, because we have to make sure they're answering properly. And so we do on a regular basis, kind of do audits of. And one of the things that's been interesting is what we do know that when a certain question comes in, generally what region it's from, and that's been fascinating to see what particular questions kind of predominate a particular region. And sometimes it's surprising. I can tell you, the questions that predominate the West are not the same that predominate the East. There are some. There's a lot of overlap, but there's some differences.
What are those those different themes or different kind of types of issues that they're looking at or asking questions about?
Well, one thing I've noticed, particularly in the States, is there's a lot of scrupulosity for some. So that's been interesting, right? I mean, a lot of questions around, is this a mortal sin or a venial sin? So that's been pretty surprising to me. The scale of which the magisterium is used just for that purpose. Another one is, and I say again, this is particularly in the West, kind of sexual ethics kind of questions. They come up a fair bit. Even in kind of very detailed, situations, and I think it's very encouraging. I mean, in some ways, I think I find that very refreshing, because I think that, especially in our culture, which is hypersexualized, right? There's a lot of, men and women, I think, that are struggling with it, and they're entering into relationships, and they want to make sure that they're living those relationships faithfully, and so just trying to understand what those bounds should be. I think that's been very cool. We noticed, like in the East, there's a lot more, questions. I think I would say like more discovery questions, and a lot more focus on saints and kind of devotional practices it tends to be a lot much larger kind of focus. So anyways, there's a lot more I could say on that, but certainly there are differences. I mean, the other thing I'll just say, another thing that's been interesting, just kind of observing the questions that people ask, is that some questions are not directly covered by the magisterium formally. So we had a question, to give you an example, talking about Reiki, which is some kind of new age religion, which I didn't really know much about. I think I'd heard it before. And so when someone asked about this, they were unhappy with the answer, because it was kind of very vague and not very helpful. And so we looked into it, as we do typically when we have a problem with an answer, and said, why the AI come up short on this one? And what we've realized is because the church has never formally addressed that, at least at the kind of the Holy See, Vatican level. But it had been addressed at the conference level by the USCCB. So that was a good example of, we started primarily with kind of official church teaching at the highest, and we realized that we also have to embrace kind of more local church teaching too from the conference. And this is something that we're becoming more and more focused on now, is working with the bishops' conferences to determine what documents and what important spiritual context do they think the model needs to have access to, so that people that are using Magisterium AI in their regions are getting answers which are not just universally relevant, but that are also particularly relevant to them, right? They're taking into account local customs and kind of local doctrine. And that's not because doctrine would obviously deviate from magisterial, but simply it's just been better explained or emphasized in important ways. And I think this Reiki was a good example. The USCCB had a pretty substantial document explaining why that practice is dubious. And so, anyways, as you ask these questions, when we become aware of that there are still gaps in our knowledge base, it then allows us to kind of start an investigation to find out who's covered it off. And sometimes it can be surprising where those answers come from.
No, that's fascinating. And Matthew, as we look forward in like the next 6 months, the next year, what developments should users look out for on Magisterium AI in terms of things that are coming up? The users, I know that there are many users who use it on a daily basis. Some use it for classroom, some are using it for formation. But what are things that you're excited about that are coming up?
Well, I mean, one just would be this: the AI is just going to get better. I mean, a lot better. So we got to get smarter, so more intelligent, better at answering your question. Hopefully, clearly and concisely, but certainly it will get better. And that's because, as a company, we're committed to being AI complete. And that means as new state-of-the-art models come out, we always want to take advantage of the most intelligent models and make sure that they're powering Magisterium AI under the hood. That comes with particular challenges. Every time a new model comes out, we have to effectively evaluate how faithful it is. And so that's why we developed these evals, which is a short form for evaluations. It's basically a long list of question and answer pairs. Some of those are informed by our users. And what we have to do is we have to kind of run those questions by the model and see how it answers and see how well it represents church teaching. And what we often find is sometimes it doesn't in some ways. And so then we have to kind of figure out, can we mitigate this problem like we did in the early days, right, with this particular model? And if we can, then we may swap the model out under the hood, and then we can use that more state-of-the-art model. And that's enormously beneficial because it just allows it to, I mean, especially with more reasoning breakthroughs in these models, as they get better and better at reasoning, it just means that they're better able to generalize church teaching in people's lives and things like that, or make better reading suggestions and things like that. So that's one thing I'm excited about just generally is seeing how the new breakthroughs and generally in the AI industry, we can actually make them practically useful to the faithful within Magisterium AI. So that's one. The other thing is, of course, the knowledge base expanding. I mean, I'm super excited about that. I'm here in Rome right now because we're standing up the Alexandria Digitization Hub, which is basically an effort with the Pontifical Gregorian University. And what we're doing is we recognize that we need to expand the Catholic data set. I mean, we don't have nearly enough. And if we're going to continue to work on training our own models, which is what we're doing. I haven't talked about this, but Ephraim, which is the world's first Catholic language model, something that we trained just at the end of last year, and now we're just finishing a new training run on 2.0. We haven't released it to the public, but we're seeing very promising signs that you can train a model to be faithful. So, but in order to do that effectively, we need more and more data. And so then the question, how do we get more data? Where's that data? And we realized that data was in the libraries for the most part. And so the question was, then how do we get that data out? And so we realized that we have to get to the books. We have to find ways to digitize the books. We need to scale up that digitization operation because there's not much of it going on here in Rome. So we realized we needed to speed up the pace of digitization, and we needed tools like Vulgate AI, which we built to help extract the information and process it, and then convert to vector embeddings, which makes it kind of language agnostic and allows people to query the knowledge in any language and derive insights. We needed to further develop that technology. And so with this Alexandria Digitization Hub here in Rome, we have these robot scanners, which is really cool. I mean, you put a book down and the robot literally turns the page, scans it, turns the page and scans it. We bought a little fleet of these, and we're hoping that with this fleet, we can speed up the pace of digitization. And this is particularly exciting to me because some of these books haven't been open like 100 years. So there's just a lot of, I think, profound Catholic insight that's just not accessible to people right now. And as we get into these libraries and we digitize it, it becomes accessible. It's incredible. I mean, to think when we digitize a work here in the hub, and I should acknowledge that the Alexandria Digitization Hub has been on pilot with the Pontifical Oriental Institute for over a year now. So they were instrumental in getting the hub off the ground. What's incredible to me is that we'll be able to scan a few books a day, probably more than that. And the minute those books are finished scanning and they get processed, the contents of those books are made available to anyone in the world on any device in their native language immediately. It's incredible to me. So, pretty soon, everything the church has ever written will be available to anyone on any device in their native language, right? I mean, it's insane. So, and you think about you have an AI which is becoming something like a master apologist, right? And he has access to the entirety of everything that's been written, and all of that is distilled for you when you ask a question. I mean, so never before have we had this, and I think it's an enormous opportunity for evangelization. This is not to say that the important roles of the evangelist, the human thing is unimportant. It totally is important, but I think there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be starting journeys to the Catholic faith, and I think everyone will acknowledge we don't have enough priests, and we do not have enough lay evangelists, and so we need to make sure that people, when they have these profound questions, that they can get good, faithful answers. And so I think, AI is not a perfect solution, and it's not an end of itself, but it certainly is a really powerful means to start people on a journey, right? To get them answers to profound questions, and hopefully that'll start them on a journey which eventually leads to them making contact with a Christian community, a Catholic community, or a priest. So the knowledge base expanding because of things like the hub and Vulgate is super exciting to me. And I think it's going to not just affect evangelization, which I think it'll also actually help with academic research in really important ways as well. Because as I said, as we digitize these books, and when a researcher types in a question, they may be, we're already finding this now, and they may be shocked to see what kind of comes up. They weren't even aware that these books exist, and then and therefore they're able to dig into them, and they may find more interesting research areas. Or so that's an important one. Another technology we'll be rolling out soon, or I should say feature, which I'm really excited about, is something called Saint Chat, which as you might have guessed, is the ability to chat directly with a saint. And I know that the concept of this has been around for a while, but we think we're really well positioned to do a good job with this because we have digitized the collective works of the respective saint. I mean that takes you so far, right? So if you ask a question of the saint, well, at least I should say the Saint AI, in principle, having access to its work is useful. But that doesn't tell you about the saint's personality, right? I mean, what were they like to deal with and interact with? What was truly special about their presence? What kind of impact did they have on the world? What was their lasting legacy? Their works aren't going to tell you that, right? You need context for that. And so one of the things that's been really neat as we go and digitize all the papal reflections and things like that throughout the years, and from other saints, the saints reflect on other saints. They provide context in their lives, right? Sometimes what it was like to interact with them, or sometimes reflecting on them spiritually in their writings. Same thing with the popes. And so if you take their writings and you take all the context on the saints, right, along with biographical information, you put that all together as context for the AI, it can do an incredible job impersonating a saint. And I think like if you don't do all that, right, you're not truly going to be having, I think, like a Saint Chat experience, which is truly authentic and useful. So that's something I'm really looking forward to. That'll be launching in the next couple months.
And Matthew, can you share with us some of that potential saints that people could be interacting?
Well, I mean, think doctors of the church. I mean, it's all the big ones: Catherine of Siena, Teresa of Avila. Some we'll some of the more not saints, but Benedict XVI, some of the more notable popes. John Paul II will certainly be in there as well. St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Augustine.
That's very exciting.
Yeah, and I just want to let me riff. If you don't mind, give me one more moment on this, because this is one part of the Saint Chat I'm really excited about. We thought about when we were going through and thinking through this app. It's talking to a saint is fun, but imagine you could get one saint to talk to another saint, and we were like, oh, that'd be interesting, right? So then we were like, so what if we created like this debate kind of mode where you could get like one saint to debate another saint or discuss, doesn't have to be a debate, on a topic, right? So it'd be like, let's have Edith Stein debate Catherine of Siena, I don't know, on the importance of lay women in society or something like that, right? Or no, on the lay woman vocation. And then you can have these two saints going to go back and forth on that topic. So you basically define the topic, the context. The saints go back and forth. And then we thought, well, wait a minute. What if we appointed a judge at the debate, right? Well, what if you could appoint a judge? So you could have someone like Thomas Aquinas could actually judge who he thinks won the debate. And so this is something we're building in right now, and we think this will be interesting. It'd be fun, but we also think it'd be interesting for research, right? Because I mean, with all that context available for each of the saints, I mean, there could be interesting observations, right, or insights that happen just by bouncing these different ideas off each other. And so that's another facet of Saint Chat I'm really excited about. We have some other features as well. I'll just kind of quickly knock them off. Voice mode, as I mentioned, will be rolling out soon, so you'll be able to actually talk in natural language like you do to all the major apps that'll be coming out. So we have a learn mode, which will be specifically for education. And so this will be designed to help teachers develop programming curricula, and then also for students. And so it'd be very similar to the experience you have in like Claude AI and some of the other AI platforms. I know ChatGPT has an education mode as well. So essentially, it's not there to give you necessarily this just a direct answer. It's meant to help you kind of think through the questions and arrive at the answer on your own. So I'm pretty excited about. I think there's a lot of need for kind of Catholic AI in the education space, because I think they know right now that a lot of their students are using secular AIs, and they want to try and use one that's it's trying at least to be aligned. So I think that feature will be useful as well.
And Matthew, can you talk a little bit about, with regards to, Catholic students using these secular LLMs, like the importance of fidelity and what that looks like vis-a-vis the other models?
Sure. I mean,
Like what's at risk when students are on these major secular models, and they're asking questions, and they can receive what seems like a good answer, but actually could be filled with errors or, lead them in the wrong
Sure.
places.
I think I spoke about this earlier. It's in large part, this is an issue not just for students. It's the same issue for anybody, right? I mean, if you ask ChatGPT a question and it gives you an answer, it may do some reverse rag and check the internet, right? For sources. And if you activate research mode, it may go and grab some sources online. But again, it's hard work because then you get the answer, which may sound great, but then you have to look into all the sources, right? And these are different websites. You have to bounce around to the websites and evaluate them. Is this website faithfully represented what the church says or not? I don't know. I find that kind of tedious. And if you're writing, if you have to write like a paper for school, like you need to make sure your sources are legit, right? And so spending time going through all these sources and questioning them, that's a lot of work. So I think one of the nice things about Magisterium AI is all the sources are credible, right? So they're either magisterial or they're very notable and established Catholic philosophical and theological works. I mean, we're pretty selective right now about what we include inside of the knowledge base. I mean, so when I say Catholic theological and philosophical works, I'm talking about like church fathers and doctors of the church for the most part. And then we're just starting to introduce theological journals in there as well. But these are theological journals from pontifical universities and things like that. So, I think publications like Communio, which Joseph Ratzinger founded with Anselm Balthasar. So in that sense, if you're a student and you ask Matthew a question, you get sources. You just don't have to scrutinize the sources as much as you would if you're using kind of a secular. And that's not even touching on the propensity for sycophancy and hallucinations and things, which are just much more prone in these other LLMs.
Mm-hmm. And Matthew, can you talk to us a little bit about the team behind the scenes that's working on how many people are working on Magisterium AI? What makes them special? Just share
Sure.
with our audience.
We're a small team. Very small team, and it's a global team. So we have some team members in Africa, we have some team members in North America, and then we have team members in Europe. So that's nice because you people from very different contexts, and a lot of the times they're in touch with local users who have very specific asks about how they want what kind of features or how they want the product to develop. So that's been useful. And it's particularly because, ever since we launched the platform, we've always had to think globally, which has been a big challenge, right? I mean, when we launched it, we recognized that the AI it was being used all over the world. And so that meant that we had to make sure that the user interface was translated into the language of the respective, regions that we're using in the world. And we also had to make sure that we were trying to, get ingest works, which are particularly relevant to those regions as well. So there was coming of a local experience. And so anyways, the team has been very useful, and in that respect, and humble. I mean, that's one thing I love about our team is I think this project requires a great deal of humility, particularly because we're doing a lot of kind of research and experimentation. And so sometimes, we may propose some kind of radical ideas, and so it takes a lot of like patience and humility to allow people to share those those different approaches, and then also to have kind of the courage to let them try things out, and of course recognizing that of course the enormity of what we're doing. I mean, when you're doing something like representing church teaching for people, I mean it feels like an awesome responsibility, and so there's this big tension that we've always kind of had in the company as we have to make sure that everything we do is as safe as it possibly can be safe. And that's meant that we've moved slower than some other companies in some respects because we don't want to risk hallucinations. We don't want to lead someone astray. And this is certainly something as I've traveled around and spoken to the various bishops' conferences, this has been a big sticking point for them. And I think this is one of the things they've appreciated particularly about Magisterium AI, is that we do kind of the hard work. We build the eval sets, and we go after digitizing. The work needs to be digitized, even sometimes when it hasn't been digitized. We'll put that work in because we recognize it's important to make sure that we're providing the right answers. And so one thing I'll say, I talk about like patience and humility, but one thing I have to say, I mean, I've been remarkable. It's been remarkable for me as the CEO of the company is the grit of the team. I mean, some of the things we asked them to do, especially in the early days, was just some tedious stuff. I mean, literally going and copying and pasting, text right out and chunking it for our AI. So digitizing, the patrimony of the church in the early days was incredibly tedious. It was very hands-on. Now, we've been able to develop more and more AI tools to help facilitate that, and Vulgate's obviously been a big help. But I mean, there were times, almost as 8 months where they were just literally every day just going and finding texts and running them through translation engines or copying and pasting and then chunking them for, and this is something that not just we didn't just hire digital ingest people. Some of these people work in the marketing team and things like that. So they jumped in because they recognize, especially in the early days, this knowledge base being so limited in size was causing problems, and they recognize this is something that takes all hands on deck. We all got to drop what we're doing and just focus on this one issue. So I appreciate that, because that was really grueling work, and they stuck with it even though it wasn't part of their brief.
Oh, that's very inspiring. And Matthew, you mentioned speaking at different bishops' conferences. What has been the response from the church, and whether the local the local bishop, or all the way up to being here in Rome, and having contact with certain cardinals and members of the Holy See?
Well, I think it surprised me when I first, and again, I've been doing this for almost 2 years now. So it's changed a bit, the response, but I will say even from the early days, there wasn't really a heated debate. I mean, I have to say, the first time I was summoned to to a couple of bishops' conferences, summoned's not the right way of putting it, but when I showed up there, I was a little worried. Might be walking into like a firing squad, because the AI wasn't perfect, and we knew we still had challenges, and I was worried that they may say too big a risk and we should stop, which I was deeply sympathetic to at the time, and I wrestled with myself. I again, like I said, the reason why I just kept going is because I realized that it's kind of a zero sum. If they can't come to us, they're going to go to another AI. It's just how it is now, right? But I was really surprised. For the most part, the questions started really around just, what is this technology? Explain it to me. I don't understand it, right? How is this different from what's come before? So that was kind of cool, kind of a little bit of fact finding. And then, as opposed to them saying, it's too risky, I don't like it, right? It's not human. They were more just curious. They're asking questions about it as a tool. So I mean, how far can we go with this tool? I mean, which way is it good? Which way is it not? So that kind of curiosity gave me a lot of hope. I think for the most part, most bishops did see it, something like the printing press, right? Something that's useful and doesn't seem like something the church should ignore. It's just too useful a tool. I mean, they all went to seminary, they all studied, and they know how hard it is, right, to go and find, get answers to certain questions. They've all been in the libraries and had to pull books out of the stack. So I think they all recognize that if there's ways to make that more process more efficient, this is good. And I think they also, again, like this is Pope Francis's time when he was Pope, and he talked a lot about reaching the peripheries. And I think all the bishops recognize that we have to do a better job of ensuring that Catholic wisdom and insight makes its way to the peripheries in particular, right? And it's distilled so that they can understand it. And they also knew that there are limited priests and there's limited catechists, and so this is a problem which is extremely difficult to solve. And I think so any kind of tool that can maybe help us on this has to be at least explored. So this is a long way of saying I generally think they were very open. And then, over the course of, a couple of years, there was more and more enthusiasm. There was still obviously some concern about the technology generally in society. And that's something we talk a lot about, is where is this technology headed? What are the likely impacts on civilization? What is the unique role of the church in this? And, I provide whatever insights I could. I'm no expert in that. But I think for the most part, I think that they know that AI is here to stay, and it's something that the church has to invest in, and we should try to be a leader in this technology insofar as we can.
That's very inspiring. And Matthew, I guess final question is, Pope Leo XIV has spoken quite a bit about artificial intelligence, and it looks like in the coming months we'll most likely hear that he has an encyclical speaking on this topic. Do you have any insight if he's a Magisterium AI user?
I doubt it. I doubt it. He is one of those rare people I think on Earth, right? Who's got enough saved upstairs. I don't think he has to use an LLM. But I mean, I think I'm obviously very happy that he recognizes the import of the technology, and I do think it'll be a central focus of his pontificate, which is good because the technology is going to reshape human civilization like no other technology has before. I think it'll be the import of it will be far greater than the Industrial Revolution, which is difficult to conceive of. And I think we're certainly going to need someone like Pope Leo to help shepherd us through this transition. But my hope for him when it comes to this kind of technology is that, and I think he will, I hope he will, is to focus on the fundamentals, right? Is to not get distracted by people who want him to opine on the ethics of the technology or how it's or the way that it's being practically applied by this lab. Is that good or is that bad? I'm not saying that there's not use in the church kind of being on record when it comes to ethics of AI and how it's practically used in the world. I mean, obviously, right? I mean, obviously that the church has to safeguard the human person in any ways that the technology seems to be impeding, human dignity. The church has to speak out. But I think if all the church is doing is just reacting all the time, I think that could be a big problem because the technology is moving at such a quick pace. You'll spend all day reacting, and I think what's needed more from the church than anything else is to help us know where to direct the technology. Like, I mean, like even when governments are coming up with regulations for the technology, I mean, they're saying the technology should be used like this and it shouldn't be used like that. I mean, that determination of when it should be used and when it shouldn't be is based on a prudential judgment, which is based on what, right? And you would think that's based upon some fundamental insights in the human condition, but also on some understanding of where this technology should be leading humanity, right? What kind of a world? And that's where I think the Pope can add unique value, because I think for most of us have a hard time envisioning what the world's going to look like. And well, I mean, and maybe in some ways it's very easy in the sense because Hollywood has shown us all kinds of different ways this could play out. But most of them seem like they're fairly doomerist. Right? I mean, like most of what Hollywood has shown us the future is going to look like, I think, when it comes to technology, human beings, it doesn't look good. It looks like post-apocalyptic. And I think that we're supposed to be people of hope. And so if that's how we're going to proceed, I really worry. I really worry about how this is going to play out. Like I think we need to have a clear understanding of what the city of God looks like. And as he's an Augustinian, I hope what he can do is help remind us of what the city of God looks like, and can help encourage us to focus more on building that. And I think that in large part that just starts with just understanding what is the purpose of the human being, right? What is our purpose? What should we be doing with our lives? What matters in life? And then what kind of civilization do we need, built up around us in order to help, facilitate human flourishing, basically, right? So if the church is the leading expert in the human condition, which I believe that it is, it's been studying the human condition continuously longer than any organization on earth. What we need from the church right now is for them to help us understand what a future civilization which is focused on human flourishing practically looks like. Like what does day-to-day life look like? What is the right relationship of AI and robots in that new world? Right? What things should robots be doing? What things shouldn't robots be doing? And the same goes for AI. So if they can help us get clear about, as Cardinal Collins used to say to me, if you know where you're going, we're likely to get there. If they can help us get clear about where we're supposed to be going, then I think we can work backwards. And then we can make sure that the regulations we're proposing or the ethical frameworks we're developing for AI are properly aligned towards an end. And then, and in some ways that's good, because once we understand that end and we know that we have the right regulations and ethical frameworks in place, we can be excited. We can be hopeful about the future we're building, right? Because we all know it's better than where we are now, and our kids will be better off if we put in the work. And so I feel like this is something that this Pope in particular, especially being an Augustinian, is really poised to add a lot of value in. And I hope he spends more time in that than the whole reacting to the technology.
Well, that would be very, very inspiring and is deeply, deeply needed. Well, Matthew, thank you so much for sitting down with me and sharing some of the story behind Longbeard, behind Magisterium AI, and on the journey. And we'll be in touch then tomorrow for a debrief on Catholic AI.
Thanks very much, Ben.